everybody, welcome to this episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm the Forest of the East. I'm coming to you from Boulder, Utah. I've been down here in the high desert with Radha and the family. They actually just left. I'm going to be here for a little bit while longer, do some backpacking and work in the studio on some piano tracks and just new music I'm working on. I guess that's what I'm supposed to be doing, is working on new music. Thankfully, I enjoy doing that. But today I have on the episode a conversation with Robin Arnott. And Robin is someone that I met through a mutual friend, Mikey Siegel, Consciousness Hacking, Awaken Futures. And he was in Austin and I was passing through and Mikey linked us up and I went over to his place and got to try this virtual reality experience that he's calling now SoundSelf, that you can go check out. And I'll link to it in the show notes. We talk a bit about how you can use gaming and technology to induce mystical states. So it's definitely a psychedelic experience with the way it's interactive with you creating sound and the visual landscape that you're experiencing. And when I did it, actually, I was lying on a haptic table. So the sound was actually vibrating in different parts of my body. So pretty cool stuff. And just interesting to explore how technology can shift our consciousness for us to do inner work. And I'm always interested in this merging between the analog and the digital nature and these sort of technological realms, because it's sort of how we're living in these worlds right now is a kind of a quasi-cyborg, if you think about it. With our phones, it's a sort of rudimentary form of an interaction that we're having with technology in the world that will probably increase in different ways. So Robin's a game designer and he's a longstanding public speaker in the industry of consciousness technology. And I think you will very much enjoy this conversation. Otherwise, I'm just kind of getting ready to go backpacking tomorrow. I'm really excited to go out with my friend Scott here in the canyons. It's a good time of year to get out down here. It's getting quite warm, but it's not like summer hot. And I really need a chance to hop out. So when I record this, I'm here, obviously, but when this comes out, I will be out in the backcountry. So wish me well out there. And Robin and I recorded this probably about 6 weeks or so back. So it was a different time period. So just giving you a little context of where we were in our conversation and the world events. But either way, I think you'll get into this. Thanks for giving the podcast a review. I really appreciate it. We've crossed over the 150 mark on the ratings on Apple Podcasts, which is always really helpful for me to reach out to folks and ask them to come on the show. I do have some really interesting people coming on, so I'm excited for the conversations I've been recording and the ones coming up. And on May 15th, on Friday, May 15th, the album Still, which is 3 new guided meditations. They've been on the podcast here, but I mastered them with Taylor Dupree and did some remixing of them. And they're putting them out wide onto like the streaming platforms. So you can more easily access them and share them with your friends and all that kind of stuff. So that's a little album called Still of 3 guided meditations, May 15th. More stuff to announce soon, but for now, I'll keep this intro nice and short and sweet. This is Robin Arnott.
And we are spiritual beings visiting humanity.
Well, we crossed paths through Mikey Siegel, who is part of many things, Group Flow, Consciousness Hacking. I did a podcast with him. I'm forgetting which episode it was. I'm going to say it was in the mid-range there of my episodes. So people can go back and listen to that if they want to. But when I came out to do an event in Austin, you and I connected, and you showed me some things you're up to, one of them being SoundSelf, right?
Yeah.
Right, which is
been in development for
a long time.
But a long time, about 7-8 years.
So probably a good place to start is to, if you can, describe people what this experience looks like, the constituent parts, and briefly like what the goal of it is before we get too deep into it.
Yeah, sure. So SoundSelf, I think of SoundSelf as a video game, although I think some people might debate with me about that. Maybe it's an experience or whatever. We've been developing it to support VR, but it doesn't require VR. The way it works is you get into a reclined, relaxed position, lying down, if that's available, which is one of the reasons we love VR. And then SoundSelf instructs you to begin using your voice, long tones, as you would if you're oming, for example. You start at the base of this tree, and as you ohm, you rise up the tree. And by
it's
the
in
time
VR, right? I mean, that's important
it can
to say.
be. It can be in VR. But, I think the important thing for us about VR is just that it's isolating. It cuts out distraction, and this is a really nuanced experience, so that's important. But if for people who don't have VR, just like playing it in a dark room, reclined in a comfy way, that can work amazingly, like really amazingly. But VR is great, and I love showing it in VR. So yeah, you rise to the top of the tree, and then as you keep toning, the whole world kind of explodes into psychedelic shapes and colors, and the music harmonizes with your voice. And so no matter what you're doing, the experience is there to meet your voice, and you wind up kind of losing yourself into it. This experience was designed more or less channeled from my first oneness experience, and it's designed to help people reach unitive states of consciousness, or help people get into a place where their mind isn't yapping, and where they can actually just feel their connection to everything. And it does this by having such an intimate and organic responsiveness to the voice. So we have people come out of this experience pretty speechless. It's hard to describe, though. I'm doing my best, and I've been describing it for years, but the experience itself is hard to describe.
Well, my experience with it was I was on a haptic table that vibrated. Yeah. So when the bass was there, certain elements, I had earphones on, this VR headset, I'm lying on this haptic table, and I'm seeing this landscape that I'm sort of moving into, which involved this tree, and it's sort of a blossoming or an unfolding, which is very psychedelic type visual. And my voice, it was asking me in certain ways to produce, there's a microphone obviously, it's being manipulated in certain ways so that the sounds I'm hearing and the visuals are reacting from my voice, right? Yeah,
the whole experience is reacting to your voice and harmonizing with you.
Right. It's kind of a form of biofeedback, but the feedback is the creation that I choose to do with my voice. So there's a playful element to it. Now, is the goal of this, you said, to help kind of create a unitive state of consciousness, or to sort of, is it about tapping into some wisdom of ourself that maybe we normally would do with a psychedelic medicine?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So we actually just did a little study with Dr. Jeff Tarrant, and we found so there are a few qualities that you measure when you're measuring a psychedelic experience that John Hopkins is using, and so on. And for the unitive measurement, SoundSelf is producing just as reliable a unitive experience as psilocybin did in those trials. So yes, the goal is absolutely, I think that you probably think similar to me on this, just based on how you design your musical experiences, like art. I'm going to broaden it from art and just say designed experiences. I think particularly interactive experiences have such incredible potential to because consciousness in a way is a feedback loop, and so an interactive experience can fit itself into the feedback loop of your own consciousness and affect the way you experience consciousness. And games have been doing this for forever. It's just we don't usually think of they're not intentionally designed to do that. They just kind of do that as a byproduct, and usually they're narrowing your consciousness rather than say into a particular goal, rather than softening and expanding your consciousness like meditation does, or like this experience does, and I think like your music does.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that life is an interactive experience, of course. So I mean, It's like, what are the elements that you're bringing into the gaming experience that you think pushes you into that unitive experience? What makes that happen? What are the constituent parts?
I think it's a few things. So my understanding, I designed this from a very, very intuitive place. And after years and years of doing it, the answers, it wasn't designed scientifically. Like, here's the outcome I'm trying to achieve, and let me read these papers and figure out how to get there. Like the experience more or less occurred to me just a few months after my first oneness experience. And
maybe we should talk about that.
Yeah,
first,
sure.
Because it sounds like whatever that story is, that definitely influenced whatever this creation of this thing is.
Oh, hugely,
so,
yeah. That was
what drug did you take? No.
It's a good question. I took LSD, but not a lot, only a little bit. And I was, at the time, I was a novice meditator. And so I think I was kind of primed to experience something. But I was on a very small dose of LSD, and I was a Burning Man in this installation called Reunion, which was a multi-capsuled installation, and each capsule had a different channel of music. And I'd been exposed to group ohms, and I spontaneously decided to start chanting to feel myself ground into my own vibration. And immediately as I did that, the room filled with voices, other people's voices that were part of the music that was being projected into the space. And for the first time, that sense of certainty between what's me and what's not me slipped to include these voices as well. And yeah. And once that slipped, everything else began to slip. And it was kind of
there it goes.
Yeah. That's not what whoa. And
did I sign up for this? Yeah. There's always that moment, or sometimes in psychedelic journeys, where it starts to go into let's call it unitive space, where there is a threshold you have to accept of like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, we're going there, which is sort of like we're going to go past control. We're going to go past what it means to be what I thought was just sort of consciousness into that place of oneness, of allness. And usually when you get into that, it's a very blissful thing. But there is a threshold you have to cross that takes a choice. And fighting that can be quite uncomfortable. But it's scary, to cross it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, even with the memory of those experiences and dipping in and out of those experiences, sometimes it's like when it comes to me as a choice, as a like, hey, are we going to go into this now? It still has that existential terror.
Definitely.
There's like something I don't want to let go of every time.
Yep.
But I think there is, I think sometimes it can sneak up on us. And I think that's where experiences, actually, I've had music. With music, I think it can sneak up on you, and I think it's not necessarily choice, and I think those places where, because the ego holds on so much and has so much fear, and I think this is the place where art can play such an important role, because, so with SoundSelf, for example, if the whole experience is designed to first relax your ego, like if your ego's on edge, and this is the same thing with psychedelics, is that it's like, you can feel yourself approaching there, but because of your anticipation or something, your ego can be very on edge and holding on and trying to hold on,
Which can be an arguable downside of smaller doses of psychedelics, because I don't know if I agree with this. I mean, I understand it, that your ego still can control and hold you back, and then you can get out of the experience later and be like, it almost strengthens your ego, because it's like,
it can.
I harness that. Yeah. But
continue, or even that's interesting. Even like dipping into it just with the toes and then coming out with your ego sufficiently intact to kind of take ownership of it. That might be
That's the Terence McKenna line, that beware the underdose, as he would put it.
That's interesting.
He's like, it actually is, he thinks it can harm you because your ego's like, oh, I licked that. I got that under control. And
that's
as opposed
really
to just obliterating it. But
that's
I don't
really
know.
interesting because then as well, like, you could do this with meditation as well. And I know this happened to me, and this has happened to a lot of my friends who have gone deep into meditation, where there's, you start as a, self-aware novice, and then maybe you've experienced this, but for me, it seems that the people that I know, including myself, who have gone through phases where they're meditating a lot, there can be a period there where you're just kind of, you build a spiritual ego, you know, which has all the drawbacks of a not so spiritual ego with the added drawbacks of not being connectable to other not so spiritual egos. You understand what I mean?
It sounds like, I mean, as all forms of self-inquiry, like it's tricky because the masks that we wear can be quite beguiling. You know,
Yeah.
it's and the only way to really have a litmus test to say what is true is yourself. And so you're inevitably going to go down avenues that are, you think is maybe a certain kind of destination. It turns out it's just yet another turn in the journey. And then maybe we realize that hopefully it's like, well, there's probably these endless turns, and it's just kind of a lessening of attaching to any kind of destination or forms of identity, and just saying like, you were all just kind of watching that all happen. But for you, it sounds like you had a formative experience doing these group ohms. You crossed some kind of Rubicon. Something about that propelled you to saying like, I want to do this. I'm assuming to open it up to people who aren't willing to take a psychedelic, or can't, or shouldn't.
Or can't or shouldn't, or people who haven't discovered meditation yet or don't have the discipline for it. I think that, you know, the peak experiences are getting reasonably getting a fair amount of flack these days, because like Jamie Wheel has a very strong case against peak experiences, and I think it's compelling, which is that you can get addicted to chasing the peak experiences.
We've seen that a lot in psychedelic circles, at least I have. People who just keep coming back and back and back, and you're like, what's going on here? What's the point of this? You know?
There's still I think there's still a case to be made for peak experiences, because they can be those formative first steps, and they could be those moments that remind us to stay on the path, or and I think that, especially with art, because art is certain kinds of art. I'm thinking about music like what you do, and video games like what I do. It's so distributable that to create this sort of I think of it almost as a Trojan horse. It's got a little teeny seedling of enlightenment hidden in there, so that you can have a taste of something, a taste of stillness, a taste of, but the attraction to go in there is not like, oh, I should be more meditative, I should be more mindful. The thing that's drawing you in there is novelty, which I think, you know, as I've been reflecting on this over the years, I've come to an opinion of novelty that, to me, novelty is, excuse me, I'm kind of stumbling over my words because I'm trying to form something here. It's like pursuing something just for the raw joy of it is more pure a pursuit, and will leave you more open to being transformed by the pursuit than pursuing it with some goal or some end in mind, even if that goal or end is something like greater compassion or mindfulness or stillness. Coming to something just by saying, which people do with art, show me something I haven't seen before, surprise me, entertain me even. You're just so open to the experience. And so packing a little bit of most video games are like, sure, cool, I'll surprise you with something. Check out the size of this gun, or like, look at these cool things you could do. And it's satisfying. But I think there's a deeper satisfaction to be gained from, I'm thinking about conversations now, you know, those conversations that surprise me by going somewhere really deep and still. A video game or piece of art can do the same.
Kind of dropping your agenda as you walk in, which in some ways, I don't know if we can completely, but I think that's a worthy intention. It's thinking about that everything has infinite possibilities. And we cut ourselves off when we say like, well, I'm expecting possibility A, B, or C, which may be likely or true, but the truth is, it's infinite. And would you say that when people are going into the SoundSelf experience, that they don't need any kind of meditative practice to get the fullness of the experience? Because I would say the opposite for psychedelics. Now, you could you could stumble into anything. I certainly know as I did in the past when I was young,
Yeah.
but meditation seemed to open up a doorway for the psychedelic experience where it went to a whole nother level of...
Well, we find that in SoundSelf. So if people have a meditative background, or if people have a psychedelic background, this is something I still don't totally understand. But if people have experience with psychedelics, SoundSelf, I think, re-triggers that psychedelic memory. So we got people, when we show it to people who have done a fair amount of DMT, often they'll come out of it saying that was like DMT. I think it's actually re-triggering something in there.
Quite possibly, if the DMT is endogenously produced. But what about the people who do not have any experience with the psychedelic? Because I would think that's sort of the litmus test of what its effectiveness or doing.
Those are my favorite people to show it to, because they're the ones who come out of it. They're the people who go into it with the least amount of expectations. Mm-hmm. And they're the people who come out of it with the least amount of hurry to try to describe what they've experienced. So, and I also think that's probably one of the biggest values of the project is to give those people who have never experienced anything like this. And by this, what I mean, I suppose, is a state of deep stillness such that you can feel that which can't be named. A lot of people who don't have meditation or psychedelic experiences come into this, and they come out of the experience. I've seen people cry, have emotional responses, or just be unable to speak for a little while. I don't know if it's going as deep for them as people who have primed themselves already. I think that the priming with meditation or psychedelics can be helpful, but I just know my favorite people to show it to are the people who haven't had that experience, because there's something to that surprise factor that I think is so magical.
So how can people experience this, or what are the plans with it?
It's going to be coming out. Right now we're targeting April. Hopefully
of 2020.
April of 2020, week of Bicycle Day. So that's what we're targeting right now. We're fixing bugs and optimizing right now, so hopefully we'll make that target.
How is this release happening? How do people, if they want to, it's April or after that when they're hearing this, that they want to check it out, they just search for it?
You can look up SoundSelf. Mm-hmm. You could Google it. For people who are gamers, you'll be able to get it through Steam. You'll be able to get it through the Oculus Store. Those are the first places to check. But we are releasing this as a video game. We're treating it as a video game.
Mm-hmm. I worked on a video game years and years ago. That was Deepak Chopra's video game called Leela. I just did some music for the heart chakra. Every level was a chakra. And I remember at the time, they put my friend Louis Kofsky, dear brother, first manager of East Forest. He was the one who produced this thing, and it was a massive project. And they put a lot of intention into, how the gaming itself, sort of like you, is helping produce an inner experience, inner stillness. And they use things like the Xbox, I think it was called Kinect, where it can see your body movement. So most of the gameplay involved forms of twisting or body movement that was basically forms of yoga. So you're actually by playing, you're doing things that are helping you get into the center. And in between the levels, it could even measure your stomach as you're meditating and give you feedback and teach you how to meditate, which I thought was fascinating. It was that subtle that it could read your breath and your stomach. And so we'd create music in between the levels that would also help kind of push you into that inner state. It had a lot of promise. And when it came out, it was a bit before its time. Things like Call of Duty make $1 billion+. It came out a similar week of one of those releases. And something like this, a lot of Deepak's fans, I'm sure, are older, don't really play games. They're book people. Whereas it was just kind of hard for people to discover. It was called Leela in the game. And so...
I remember Leela.
Yeah, but I've seen in some of the conferences that we've been at, and I'm sure you've been at, the ways people are using gaming for brain development and also healing traumas with vets, and also working with people who have had all sorts of problems, and using the gaming as a way of playing around with creating new connections in the brain and neuroplasticity. So it's definitely a cutting edge form, I know, of some brain science out there that people are doing. So you're onto something in that sense.
Yeah, and I think people are ready for it. Leela might have been a little bit ahead of its time. The predecessor to Leela, which is Journey to the Wild Divine, was way ahead of its time. Also Deepak Chopra. And I think people are getting more ready for this, though. You know, like our generation, you look at in the checkout line. I live in Austin, and the checkout lines in the grocery stores, you know, every magazine has a person meditating on the front cover, and I'm sure part of that is a bubble. Maybe it's not like that in Dallas.
A little bit the Austin world.
Yeah, but I think people are more and more ready for this, and I think people are more. I think Burning Man's had a huge impact on our culture, even for people who've never gone to Burning Man. Some of those values and design principles have bled outside of Burning Man and produced design ethos that have produced some really engaging stuff that's changing the way people relate to location-based experiences, to interactivity. So I think people are more and more ready for... The question has always been about interactive experiences, about games. Okay, so how is this going to entertain me? What's this going to show me that I haven't seen before? I think people are asking more and more nuanced questions, like how is this going to impact the way I perceive reality while I'm playing it? You know, how am I going to feel after I'm playing this? Is this just a distraction for me, or is this as a reflection to experience something deeper? And again, I come back to the music, because I think music, like I look at what you're doing with East Forest and with your shows. You know, you don't follow the tradition of how you do a music show, where you have a lot of people in seats and everyone's facing you. You follow more tradition of like a gong bath or something. Right?
A gong bath?
Yeah. You know, everyone's lying down.
Yeah. It's funny. I just never thought about it. I've never used the analogy of a gong bath, but maybe I will now. It's a good one.
Well, yeah, you use the analogy of leading a medicine ceremony, right?
Yeah, a ceremony in general is sort of the carrier wave that I'm just thinking, like, what does that mean to be in a ceremony, and how can we use that as a piece of technology to go deeper?
Yeah, that's
music
nice.
Music is a big part of that.
Music's always a big part of that.
Yes,
I think
for
music's
ceremony,
so powerful.
typically.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've fully harnessed the ways music, what kind of effect it has on our lives. And we self-medicate with it all day long, a lot of people, and it's all over the place. And sound in general.
That's really interesting.
It's the substrate of everything, just so much of our world. But
that's really interesting what you say about we self-medicate with it. And I think that's the right word. We can self-medicate, or we can take ourselves on.
Most of it's unconscious. You know, it's like you put on a particular song in the morning, or, I mean, anytime you choose a song, it's a form of choice and medicine there, and how you want to shift your mood.
Yeah. It's like eating, you know, like eating food is probably my default addiction. So if there's something I'm trying not to feel, I'll go to food and maybe eat a little bit too much, or eat some sugar or something like that. I catch myself doing the same with music sometimes, just choosing, you know, sometimes I'll be choosing music that will be numbing something I'm feeling. And sometimes I'm choosing music I don't even know why I'm necessarily choosing that music, but it'll bring me somewhere deeper inside of myself to help me feel something or feel more connected to something.
So there is music in the SoundSelf experience. I mean, it's interesting because it was like you make a tone with your own voice, and then it's sort of being manipulated in different ways to create different tones and soundscapes. So what is the interaction between sound, your voice, but there were it wasn't just that. I felt like, if I remember correctly, there was a form of music or tones to it.
Absolutely, yeah. There's this artificial intelligence that's dynamically shifting the music around you. So it's always going to harmonize with your voice. It's going to sometimes remember your voice and play it back to you in a way that's musically consonant. So it's like having a musical partner that you're collaborating with and jamming out with, but it's responding intimately to what you're doing. It's very it's got these heavy, long pads. It's not very melodic. It's more just this sort of music, this shifting tonal landscape that responds to you and dances with you.
It was complex. I remember it being pretty thick. Like it wasn't just like you do something and there's a linear, oh, it's doing that. It was kind of, it was psychedelic. Like it was hard to say what was actually happening, but it's multi-layered in sound.
Yeah. Well, that's important because, so I know a lot of people who are puzzling over this idea of how do you create experiences, interactive experiences that help people reach more transcendent states of consciousness, like constantly in these conversations with people. And most of the experiences that I've tried, something they miss is that if the way the software responds is too transparent, it becomes an instrument. It becomes something that is like an extension of your existing identity. So just like I'm talking to you, I don't know what you're going to say next. And you don't know what I'm going to say next. And so we can actually have a conversation and surprise one another and even surprise ourselves. It's really important for any design that is trying to invoke mystery to actually be mysterious. And I think that's something that's missing in all the meditation apps and in most of the ways that people are approaching the challenge of shifting consciousness with interactive design.
Tell me more about how you think that's missing from the meditation apps. Like how would you see that being different? I'm curious.
Well, this is the difference between I think a game and a tool. And that's why I think of SoundSelf as a game, even though it's more like an experience. So you approach a game with that open-heartedness, just asking, hey, entertain me, show me something that surprises me. And it immerses you in a world that is constantly surprising you. It never follows your expectations. And as soon as a game does start to follow your expectations, you put it down and try something else. That's when you say a game has gotten boring or stale. When we talk about the replayability of a game, that's what we're talking about. So most meditation apps are not designed with that in mind even a little bit. They're designed to be thought of as a tool, which is something that you come to. You're not saying, surprise me. You're saying, do the thing that I expect you to do to help me get the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. I think that's helpful for forming a discipline, but I think for actually experiencing mystery and coming into contact with mystery, it's extremely limited. So I'm thinking, and I don't want to bash these apps at all because they're incredible and it's great the way they're making meditation so much more scalable.
No, that's an interesting idea, is like the element of play as a teacher in meditation. And it's like, yeah, what a wonderful idea. And how would that look? Mm-hmm. And the idea of a game, maybe it is a game.
Yeah.
The whole thing's a game. So, yeah, I wonder
and
how
sometimes the game is very serious.
Yes.
Sometimes we play a very serious role in the game.
Yeah. I wonder. So, do you see what you're creating as a meditative tool, or do you make the differentiation?
I make the differentiation. People use it as a meditative tool, but we call it a technodelic. The full title of the experience is SoundSelf, a technodelic. And I think it's just
technodelic.
Yeah, technodelic, like a portmanteau of psychedelic and technology, which is probably not going to play very well in the Asian market, but because they don't like psychedelics out there. But yeah, it's much more like a psychedelic than it is like a meditation tool, because it puts you into direct contact with mystery.
Well, meditation, like I was saying, I feel like is at its best, or psychedelics are at their best when you bring meditation to them. So, I mean, there's a marriage here to be had, probably.
Yeah. I think you're probably right. I think you're probably right. When I look at the way people are using software, because that's my field, is software, the place where I see the biggest room for growth is in, or for development, or for making something that really can touch people, is not in the more disciplined tool department. And honestly, that's just not a very interesting. I'm not interested in like porting technologies and just making it run on this new technology. like taking an existing technology like meditation, and it's like, look, now it works on your iPhone. You can meditate with the help of your iPhone. It's like, that's great. That's going to help a lot of people and so on. But it's not as interesting a problem to solve to me as, hey, we have this technology, which is gaming and virtual reality, if you want to step it up. Where can this take us in terms of mental states that you couldn't have done before? Like anything a meditation app does, you can do with yourself or with a meditation teacher. But what can a video game do if you're approaching it with the question of how will this change my state of consciousness, rather than how will this distract me, or how will this give me a sense of fun? But how will it actually fundamentally change the way I relate in the moment to being a living, conscious life, to being life? The answers to me as a creator are just so much more interesting than a port from analog technology into digital technology. It's what can the digital technology do that's actually new? And the closest thing that I have to compare it to, which is why we call it a technodelic, is psychedelics.
Well, this is something that Mikey Siegel is sort of an evangelist for, is about how technology can bring us closer together, how it can make more group connection, whereas the typical mainstream story is about how technology is pushing us apart, polarization, and creating senses of separateness. Obviously, it's going to do elements of both. I would say largely technology, as we're experiencing it in its early explosions, is creating forms of separateness. And we're all discovering that the hard way, whether it's feeling more alone by being more connected, say social media or whatever, or that, you know, our portals of experiencing the world are through this screen, and somehow we know more, there's more information, yet we feel worse. And so the natural thought there would be like, how can we transform the technology that we're using? And the one we use the most for most folks is a phone, as a way to bring more of those positive aspects of feeling better. And there's a code there to crack that has not been cracked. As you're saying, many people are trying to do it. And so I'm curious if you ever thought about how this stuff you're developing could be done somehow through the phone. Like, you know, those VR sets where you drop your phone into it and that's the screen, you know, things like that. So the accessibility goes way up. What have you thought about technology and our future of it, and how it may bring us together versus push us apart?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head with the problems of technology and with the potential of technology. It's interesting because it seems like with every potential thoroughly pursued produces some. I'm thinking about social media, you know, which is a thoroughly pursued approach to technology to solve the problem of disconnection, but it winds up creating a lot more disconnection. So I think there's a few things at play here. Gosh, this is a really complex and deep question.
It's complex, but it's also just very prescient. It's something that is sort of at the forefront of everyone's lives. Yeah. And it's not that we have to solve it in this conversation, but it's just kind of, I'm curious, I'm sure you thought about this a bit.
I think about it a lot,
like,
man.
What platform do we put this on? And like, is this helping? Is it hurting? And like, how will people, what's the accessibility of it?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. I am not a technological utopianist by any means. And I am a technologist. I work in technology, and I do that with a lot of self-awareness and with a lot of, I think there's a lot of problems with our relationship with technology. And I think our relationship with technology really kind of urgently has to change. I think it is changing. I think it's inevitable it's going to change because it's so not serving us the way. And this is just what we do is we do something until it hurts so much that we can't keep doing it, and then we change what we're doing.
No one's in charge except for us as individuals. I mean, we're just going to have more and more things to dive into, and opportunities.
More and more people are leaving social media and being very selective about their tools. Mm-hmm. I don't think we have the vocabulary to think about being selective about our tools in the way we do now, maybe 10 years ago, because I don't think we really understood the costs.
I don't know if we do now, but you're right. We're starting
I'm
to
sure we
understand
don't.
it. But I mean, God knows. I mean, let alone for developmental brains, but even just for
Oh my
ours.
gosh.
I mean, the level
Yeah.
of technological addiction and what that is doing to us, we have no idea. Very little data. It's very early studies about like, wow, who knew this does this? I mean, I heard, Tristan Harris. You ever heard of that guy? You ever heard his?
Yeah.
He does some amazing stuff about that, your attention and currency and digital stuff and social media. But you put a phone on the table, and studies show that it dropped like the sense of connectedness between the two people by, I don't know, like 17% or something. It's like just having it on the table, no one's touching it or using it. It's just the energy of that sort of talisman.
It's a back door.
Yeah.
It's like it's a constant opportunity inviting you to leave this conversation and go somewhere that might be a little more engaging.
Yes, and we do it all the time. But it's things like that. It's how we don't quite recognize the influence it's having on our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I look at... I started thinking about the reason I'm so passionate about this project now, 8 years later. Initially, it was the excitement to do something new with technology, and the excitement and feeling like I was given a design by forces that I don't understand that said, make this. And that's still alive for me. But nowadays, it's tempered by something a little more sober, which is witnessing our addictive relationship with technology and our codependent relationship with technology, and seeing a really pressing need to go in there and... It's coming to me, just a sec.
I love this idea of a codependent relationship with technology. That seems like a more appropriate way to describe it than just an addiction. It does seem codependent. I mean, we are the ones creating the technology and letting it flourish and innovating it and growing it and giving it all this power and relying on it and being in a codependent relationship with it.
And the thing with codependent relationships is that there's always a lie in the middle of it. So what's the lie we're telling ourselves with our relationship with technology?
That we're not addicted, or that it's making our lives wholly better, or blind to its even physical effects on us. That it's symbiotic, or it's fine, it's harmless. It's invisible, it's harm, so it's not really there. Whether it's EMF or whether it's psychological or cortisol levels or whatever it is, some of us just hear no evil, see no evil.
Yeah.
Because we need it. It's like, well, I need it. This is how I communicate, or this is how I get my directions, or this, I do everything. It's sort of like I don't have a way to opt out anymore.
We're talking together over Zoom.
There you go.
And
using all sorts of tech to record, and that's sort of the basis of how I make music too, is all sorts of amazing digital tools. But
I imagine you have a different relationship with your musical tools, right? Does that feel codependent?
This is a strange discussion because, I mean, there's anything from these pianos back here and recording them, and the way I enjoy having it, sort of the base of it being, actual sound being created as opposed to everything being a digital landscape. But when I perform live and I'm using computers as a backbone to even just serve as a mixer and so forth, like Ableton or whatever, I feel like that computer has so much power. I have reverence for it, and I try not to have too much voodoo, but I kind of do, because it's...
You just said the word reverence, and I want to put a pin on that, because that speaks to me of a relationship that is, we don't have a reverent relationship with our social media accounts, and we rarely have a reverent relationship with the media we indulge in.
Yeah, I guess reverence is a form of like how, I don't know what the definition would be, but it feels like it means I'm saying I'm subservient to it, or it has more power, or I give it like a kind of respect in a way. Only because it's a mysterious box of space gray that I don't really know what's going on in there, and I just want it to work well. And so, I can do anything I can that I know I can do, even to just like, caressing it with gentleness as I carry it around the globe, because I feel it's got me by the balls. It's like I need
Wow,
you
yeah.
to do this job, and I need this entire corporation of Apple in a way, and I have this, definitely a fucked up codependent relationship with that company, where I'm angry at them, but I need them, and I need them to do better sometimes, but I don't have a lot of power, and so anyway, I think with my music making, it's a multi-layered process, because I appreciate the tools, and I also sometimes am scared of them, but I also sometimes try to just say, like, the mantra I tell myself is I'm in the flow, and the flow has my best interest. It's like I'm in the river, and the river is me, and I don't need to fight it. And it's like it's holding me, as opposed to this notion of like, oh my God, I have to control this, I have to control that. Or the things you can't control, the bits of information flying around. It's like I just trust that I'm being held.
Do you have that same trust that you're being held when you're scrolling on Facebook?
I don't scroll on Facebook.
Yeah.
I made that choice.
Good, yeah.
I stayed out. I've been out of the feeds for a couple years because I couldn't get enough benefit for the disadvantages, and I just had to be really honest with myself about the experience, and it wasn't helping me in the long run. So I had to pull out. But I'm sure there's other analogies, that are apt. I have many, many, many forms of being a modern man, just like everybody else. And that's my main interest, is how do we walk this walk in modernity and do it with as much grace as we can, and not to say I'm just going to keep turning things off, which I think there's a dead end to that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's an avoidancy trap in that. And I think that's because you can't just do that in
discipline.
life.
Yeah, discipline and practice, I suppose, is where the rubber meets the road. I don't want to just have my own sort of technological bypass and say, like, well, it's all good. I'll just figure out how to make it work. It's like, well, it's a fraught path. And things like what you're trying to develop or the music I'm trying to make are ways of creating tools, I would hope, that make it maybe a bit more of a conscious path, than one that, we're always going in and out. It's in waves. So we're always trying to surf those waves with more grace. And surf, maybe those waves aren't as big, but you can't avoid the waves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see it as like people are coming to wherever people are going, they're going to find a reflection of themselves in that place. And I want to put something in the game space that can reflect parts of them that are not being otherwise reflected in game space.
That's great. Yeah.
You've really got me thinking now, because I've been thinking about this a lot recently, just the paradox of being a technologist and the cost of technology, and the sort of blind religiosity of technological utopianism that is just an unconscious backdrop to engaging in our world. You don't have to think of yourself as a technological utopianist. You don't have to. That's just the background belief that runs the whole thing. And so I'm wrestling with that, and I'm wrestling with my responsibilities as a technologist in that space. It seems like ditching technology would be a really irresponsible choice, especially given that I've got my finger on the pulse of like one very specific and humble way that I might be able to bring a little bit of healing into the space. Go on. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just reminding myself that all forms of technology, the constituent parts that they're made of, the plastics and the capacitors and the metals, are all from the earth. It's just another thing we've made from nature. And in some ways, it is nature. And but then we also have our old forms of technology we just don't want to forget, because they've been baked into our DNA and our bones for millions of years. And those are the ones that really work the most tried and true for us. And it's not to say we can't integrate the new ones in, but just like the seasons and working with day and night and getting in those rhythms and eating well and good exercise and good counsel, the things that a dog needs, if you focus on those first, you'll probably get 90% of the way there. We forget the basics, and it's not complicated at all.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, we forget the basics.
But it's an amazing time of transformation and all these amazing tools that are all just so ridiculous that it's all just kind of exploding into our lives. It's an incredible time. And so I think it's interesting to see that you find yourself navigating through. And I love to just, drop into your world and say, like, are you hopeful? Are you hopeful for how this is all unfolding as technology is coming forth?
I'm very hopeful. I'm not only very hopeful, but I'm very proud. I've shared with you some of the things I'm kind of grappling with and wrestling with. But it's a really active grapple and wrestle. It doesn't resolve in my being. And it's just moving forward and making the right choice for the moment. So, but one thing I do see is, firstly, I see a generation turning our attention back inward. And secondly, I see us doing that built upon some incredible economic infrastructure that was made by our parents and grandparents' generation. I think that you look at a lot of that economic infrastructure and it looks unconscious, and maybe most of it or a lot of it is, but it's so ripe to be turned into something aware and compassionate. It's like the clay now that we now have an opportunity to breathe deeper life into. I've chosen video games in part because I've been inspired just by how leverageable the institutions of video games are for making them, but also for distributing them and marketing them and communicating them. We have a whole culture around helping people find the right game for them and technology that is so effective for distributing games that it's practically transparent now, until you start to kind of fiddle with the pieces of it. That, to me, it's like a superhighway that's ready to be put to really nourishing, humane use. That's kind of what I see with all of our institutions. Legal institutions, governmental institutions, institutions of industry, and so on. So I'm extremely optimistic, and I'm extremely proud of my generation and the conversations that we're having about how to use these institutions in a way that is responsible, one, but is also inspirational.
Yeah, I love the idea. It's important to note that's like really it is about inspiring one another to help make a more beautiful world. And I love also of honoring the generations that came directly before us and the world that they've put, the tools that they have created in the field that they have sowed so that we can do all this crazy stuff and have such abundance. And I appreciate you having this conversation today and sharing a bit about, your world and what you're trying to put out there. How can you remind us, like, if they want to learn more about this or your world or this product, how's the best way to do that?
Thank you for asking. Just go to SoundSelf.com. All the information is there. If you already use Steam or Oculus in April of 2020, hopefully in April of 2020, you should just be able to go to the storefront and buy a copy of the game. And if it's not yet April of 2020, you can go to Steam and wishlist it.
And if you don't have a VR set, is there a way to still check it out?
Absolutely. You do not need a VR headset to experience SoundSelf. But if you're going to do it on your computer, you just want to make sure that you've got a room where you can turn off the lights and turn off your phone, maybe have a little bit of tea beforehand, ritualize it a little bit. It goes a long way. But turning
Yeah.
off the lights is super important. Putting on the headphones, turning off the lights, very important. Yeah, VR is not necessary at all. So
Okay.
again, that's soundself.com.
Set and setting, drop
Yes.
in, choose your reason why you're doing it. Sounds great, man. Well, I look forward to checking it out again. I'm sure it's evolved a bit, and
Thank you.
thank you so much for chatting. There you go. Thanks, Robin. It's always good to catch up with him and dig into his world. If you want to check out that experience, you can. I'll link to it again. It's Andromeda.com entertainment. So Andromeda.com is the website of Andromeda Entertainment, where you can see about everything he's been talking about here, including SoundSelf, among other things. So it's fun to check out. This music you're listening to is We Are Truth, the Album Leaf rework from the album Reworks, which are 8 different reworks of the Ram Dass album. That's awesome. If you haven't seen that and you're a fan of the Ram Dass album, this is 8 more tracks of amazing artists that came together to just make it even better and create more content. So that's what's going on here. Thanks again for reviewing the podcast. Thanks for doing what you guys do. Stay strong amid these strange times. This is no doubt one of the most challenging experiences for our country and the world, and will continue to evolve. And we're going to need all the fortitude we have. So keep doing it. Keep walking. Keep breathing. Don't take any shit, but if you do, do it with grace, folks.